Some days you think Boris Johnson might be turning the corner. That he just might stop being such a catastrophe. He ends COVID restrictions and at least talks about dropping the BBC's licence fee. And you ponder that we might actually get a Conservative PM who cares about liberty and personal responsibility. And then the Tories drop the white paper on the online harms bill, and you remember that he's a totalitarian fascist with the controlling instincts of a socialist on steroids. Jesus, where did it all go wrong? Just when you start to think that internet censorship can't get any worse, you realise that it's only just getting started. And this stage in criminalising it, in making online comments subject to a 2-year jail term, makes you terrified about how much worse it might get. Because it's not enough for your jokes and opinions to get you banned from social media, cancelled or sacked. Now your wrongthink will warrant you 2 years in the clink. And this law will be subject to the whims and prejudices of the people enacting it. And I think we all know exactly what type of people will be enforcing it. Certain groups will be protected from any sort of mild rebuke or joke. But others, like you and I, will feel the full weight of the law and will enjoy no such defence when they turn their abuse on us. It's not as if the internet giants haven't been getting unbearably censorious even without the government's help. Let's look at YouTube as an example. This site has been taking an increasingly dark turn since the appointment of Susan Wojcicki as CEO. And is it me, or does Wojcicki bear more than a passing resemblance to the president of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy, the woman who's been completely trashing Star Wars? They're like two super Karens who are intent on ruining everything good in the world. YouTube's taken a peculiar turn of late. They're being heavy-handed in their censorship of their content creators, while overtly pushing big media accounts. Search any topic, and you'll be bombarded with links to CNN, Sky News, the BBC, and Fox. But independent creators, like Alex Belfield, just keep getting banned. Belfield wasn't to everyone's taste, but he's an irreverent, fun-loving sort. And to consider him too dangerous for the internet, to silence him like some digital Stasi, it's a horrifying development. YouTube are giving their media rivals a helping hand, while cutting their own throats. It's a peculiar business model, but it's still not enough for Wojcicki. She's gone on record to say that she wants governments to pass more restrictive and draconian laws, to make online censorship far harsher than it is. And they seem eager to oblige. The Tories' Culture Secretary commented on the latest Jimmy Carr show, and proving unable to tell a joke from an opinion, Nadine Dorries called his show abhorrent and unacceptable. She added ominously, "We don't have the ability now, legally, to hold Netflix to account for streaming that. But very shortly, we will." It's in this terrifyingly Orwellian climate that the online harms bill was born. That proposed legislation, which drips in vague terms like harmful behaviour, opens by arguing that if we surrender our online spaces to those who spread hate, abuse, fear and vitriolic content, then we will all lose. So our challenge as a society is to help shape an internet that is open and vibrant, but also protects its users from harm. The UK is committed to a free, open and secure internet, and will continue to protect freedom of expression online. We must also take decisive action to make people safer online. Now, here it makes the mistake of seeking to protect both freedom and safety. because they're essentially contradictory concerns. You cannot be free and safe from harm. So every measure designed to protect must necessarily inhibit a freedom. On such gaping discrepancies and fallacies does this paper depend. It announces the establishment of a body that will regulate social media companies, the first of its kind in the world. It continues talking in vague ways of protecting freedom, security, and democracy, with the far greater emphasis on safety. It seems to believe that by suppressing more content, they will encourage debate. The paper raises concerns about echo chambers and disinformation, but while it bemoans such developments, it returns again and again to the idea of harm, the most ill-defined concept, most prone to the whims and feelings of those who wish to control and direct how everyone else behaves. Yet it euphemistically promises a coherent, proportionate, and effective approach that reflects our commitment to a free, open, and secure internet, before chillingly warning of the powers the regulator will be able to bring to bear against the tech providers. The paper also frequently mentions topics like terrorism and child abuse to justify its existence. But there are already laws in place to deal with these crimes. Such protestations are clearly a pretext to allow it to target far more mundane behaviour. And indeed, it eventually comes to the crux of the issue. The paper declares that the internet can be used to harass, bully, or intimidate. In many cases of harassment and other forms of abusive communications online, the offender will be unknown to the victim. In some instances, they will have taken technical steps to conceal their identity. Government and law enforcement are taking action to tackle this threat. This bill is really aimed at targeting those who call people names, ridicule their opinions, or, as we have seen all too often, simply disagree with someone wedded to woke orthodoxy. The paper also outlines how it will rely on and encourage snitching to a chillingly entitled digital police force. And it's scathing about recent disinformation. But this too is a vague assertion, because who's going to adjudicate on what amounts to misinformation? We've seen in recent years that much evidence dismissed as misinformation turned out to be entirely true, and that the fact-checkers are as flawed and partisan as any of the users they lorded over. Worryingly, the paper singles out public figures for protection. You can be sure that politicians will be uppermost in this category, and that the bill will be used to shield them from any criticism. The paper also declares the introduction of powers that will enable the government to access users' information and delete their posts and accounts. It says several of the largest companies have promised access for independent researchers to anonymised information in line with data protection requirements. This is a positive step, although it is as yet unclear whether these promises have been fulfilled. The government welcomes these steps and believes that this level of transparency to researchers is a necessary part of developing the increased understanding of online harms. We will task the regulator with encouraging this approach and ensuring companies make relevant information available. Importantly, the code of practice that addresses disinformation will ensure the focus is on protecting users from harm, not judging what is true or not. There will be difficult judgment calls associated with this. The government and the future regulator will engage extensively with civil society, industry and other groups to ensure action is as effective as possible and does not detract from freedom of speech online. It's shocking that they are open about harm overriding truth. So lies may be allowed if the government thinks they make people feel safe. Following on from this white paper, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport has recommended that internet users could face 2 years in prison for posting content that causes psychological harm. A nebulous concept that effectively criminalises anyone who makes someone else feel bad. The proposed law change will shift the focus onto the harmful effect of a message, rather than if it contains indecent or grossly offensive content, which is the present basis for assessing its criminality. This legislation is destined to be abused by the more unstable and censorious sectors of society. These laws will enable such individuals to bully and silence absolutely everybody else. It's a terrifying development, because we all know what type of people will enforce this legislation. It will attract the sort of people who are certain of their piety, those who have no qualms about imposing their humorless perception of virtue on everyone else. There's barely a single word in the entire paper that aims to protect freedom of speech and expression. It's briefly referenced, but over 99% of the document is geared towards the direct opposite, the repression of open or combative expression. The entire system is to be centred around user complaints, to be powered by the emotions of those who feel most aggrieved. And we all know how well that approach has worked in recent years. The whole edifice will, like the world has in recent years, be vulnerable to and dictated by those with the loudest voices and the thinnest skins. And that's a disaster for any society. The sanctions also only apply to user-generated content, not to any corporate or mainstream media outlets. Mainstream media has spread disinformation for centuries. But while freedom of the press is still protected, the freedoms of the wider population are now to be ruthlessly curtailed. Perhaps the government already feel the media is sufficiently compliant. That sure appears to be the case at any rate. This paper also declares its intent to monitor and prosecute private communication on social media channels and WhatsApp groups. Predictably, it sanctions hate crimes, or criticism, of protected groups, such as those centred on race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, or transgender identity. But it doesn't sanction hate crimes against anyone else. And you can be sure that Tories, Republicans, Zionists, white men, right-wingers, Brexit supporters, and the working classes will still get bucket loads of hate dumped on them every day, because they don't really count, do they? This paper will swiftly morph into yet another tool for inflicting the ideology of woke identity politics on the wider population, while pouring hatred and abuse on anyone who disagrees. It's a development that's as predictable as sunrise. For one thing, the paper explicitly suggests that all abuse directed at individual women equates to misogyny, the hatred of all women. It will also encourage snitching by those who share that radical outlook, and it will ignore complaints from those who don't. And we move ever closer to the full totalitarian dystopia of opinion that we've been sliding towards for over 30 years. In the 1990s, some of us began warning where political correctness was headed. We cautioned that the policing of language and opinion, once begun, would only continue to worsen. We were roundly mocked then, but there's little satisfaction in being proven correct. Now look, I appreciate that there are concerns with online abuse, particularly with regard to children. But this heavy-handed totalitarian response is not the answer. It's far too vague, way too open to being abused, and it will almost certainly create far more problems and far more oppression and abuse than it solves. The solution to all this seems pretty simple. Why not a two-tier system with clear indicators on the expected nature of content? Some sites could clearly label a warning that they have a zero-tolerance approach for abuse and misinformation, while others could be clearly labelled as unregulated, with warnings that sensitive users may want to avoid the site and that if they enter, they do so at their own risk. That would seem to be problem solved. It would protect the sensibilities of the permanently offended while shielding the rights of those of us who haven't completely lost their minds. But the state would prefer a heavy-handed authoritarian internet thoroughly policed to stamp out any wrongthink or deviant opinions, a dystopian Big Brother nightmare where all speech is strictly monitored and where sanctions are immediate and severe. Some people want to live in that world, and they're welcome to it. But some of us crave true freedom, and all we can feel is all our liberties slipping through our fingers, even as the new Inquisition tightens its grip. I truly wish these fears were melodrama, but increasingly they are banal reality. And the cost of these measures will be awful, because more restrictions will inevitably follow. Once states have started down the road of totalitarian control, it becomes increasingly difficult to locate reverse gear. If you'd like to support this channel, please like, subscribe, and think about buying my books. They go into these topics in much, much greater detail, and they're available on the links below. Please think about picking them up and let me know what you think. Thank you.